to make a video discussing something that a lot of people online like to talk about. A lot of people claim that the Hasidic communities and the other ultra-Orthodox communities have some kind of a bloc vote that keeps state politicians in their pockets. Now, one might be able to claim something like this on a very local level, which is part of the reason why, for the most part, communities that want to be bigger want to try to keep things within villages, smaller, in order to have less of an impact on the people outside of those villages. It's a basic concept in America, one of the most basic American constitutional concepts of federalism, that there's separation of powers, the 10th Amendment, that whatever powers are not given to the federal government are relegated to the states, to local governments, and to the people. And that's really a basic American idea that the progressive movement, for the most part, has been fighting against for well over a century. And there have been progressives both from the Democratic Party and the Republican Party who have been fighting very hard against these local freedoms that we have through the idea of federalism. That's one side of the coin. But then people say, for example, Cuomo is in the pocket of Curious Joel. Schumer is in the pocket of Curious Joel. So forth. That's really total nonsense. And a proof of that is like this. Chuck Schumer came to to both Satmar dinners, and he said, "Oh, my name is Schumer. That comes from Shomer, and I'm your Shomer. Shomer is the Hebrew word for a guardian, a guard. I'm your protector." And the thing is look at what Chuck Schumer is doing right now. He's fighting against Neil Gorsuch. Now, if you know basic history of the village of Curious Joel, the only Supreme Court justice who supported Curious Joel in their Supreme Court case was Justice Scalia, because he understood what the Constitution actually meant when it was written and not how it was interpreted later in the 40s, thanks to how FDR packed the courts, even though he wasn't successful in the way he initially intended, but just by virtue of being there so long, he was able to pretty much pack the courts, pretty much get his way, his progressive agenda rammed through, despite, he actually originally wanted to add seats to the court just to make his little hegemony there, his little oligarchy, really, as Jefferson warned that the courts would be a tyrannical oligarchy of the judiciary, and which it, for the most part, has become under progressive ideology. And it's ironic because the framers of the Constitution intended, you can kind of see this by virtue of the order in which things are presented in the Constitution, in a sense. How the very first part of the government that's mentioned was not only the legislative branch, but specifically the House of Representatives, which was the most direct answer. They had to be directly answering to the people. Then after that was the Senate. Then after that was the executive branch. And then finally, last, and in a way, although there are three co-equal branches, there was this concept that seems self-evident from the framing of the Constitution, that the judiciary was supposed to be last and most certainly least in the esteem of the framers. We see that by virtue of the fact that the Supreme Court was originally located in the basement, because it's considered to be like a gutter. For the last, it's not supposed to be the way it's being treated for the past at least 80 years, that when you can't get something passed through legislation how it's supposed to be, it's just jammed down our throats through the courts by judicial review that's been taken well, originally judicial review was only supposed to be about federal laws, but then it became about state laws, became, pushing things to be the law of the land, and that's part of the progressive agenda. And aptly, and absolutely correctly, from an originalist point of view, Justice Scalia pointed out that the formation of the Curious Joel School District in no way violates the First Amendment, because the First Amendment prohibits Congress from making any official religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. In a way, really, truly, the fight against it is a violation of the First Amendment. However, it's been misinterpreted to being applying to states and local governments since it was about, 1947. What actually took place, if people want to know the history, was that the Ku Klux Klan was upset that New Jersey public school systems, this was a case, it was 1947, 1948, thereabout, that New Jersey public school systems were paying for buses for the Catholic schools. And since how the Klan had redeveloped since Wilson's time, it was really Woodrow Wilson who resurrected the Klan in a very different way than it originally was, as it was a tremendously evil organization, during the time of Reconstruction, but it almost all but disappeared until the 1920s, when Woodrow Wilson kind of to bring it back. And at that point, it became much worse, focusing on all different minorities in many various ways. And it's really, in a sense, the epitome of what the Democratic Party stands for, even really to today. I mean, if you really think about it rationally, I mean, look at what else happened around that time with the formation of Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood was all about eugenics, and basically, the Democrats are still the same KKK Democrats, but instead of lynching young men who are alive, they lynch babies in the womb. Because look at how many people from the African American community are really lynched in the womb thanks to Planned Parenthood. I mean, that's what it's really about, essentially. All the other things are incidental to that main goal of these groups. But anyway, that's besides the point. Essentially, that's what happened initially, was that the KKK was upset that New Jersey was giving school busing to parochial schools, particularly the Catholic schools. And then, so then they sought to have it declared unconstitutional by the First Amendment, quote-unquote, the separation of church and state, even though that's not what Jefferson meant when he said separation of church and state. And that's how this developed into this whole rigmarole that we have. And the courts found it, very interestingly, even though they found that it was legal for New Jersey to provide school busing to Catholic schools and to other parochial schools, they still made a precedent that they did believe that the separation of church and state applied to state and local governments, which was never the case before. In fact, when the First Amendment was ratified, many of the states who ratified the First Amendment had official religions, and many of the localities within those states had official religions. That's the history of America, which the Democrats want to really wipe out of the history books, the truth of what the founding of this country really was based on, of absolute freedom and not the tyranny of the federal government. It was all about loosening the bounds of the tyranny of the federal government. A lot of people felt that the Constitution gave the federal government too much power, and that's why they demanded a Bill of Rights. Now, with that being said, Justice Scalia said very aptly that the chief rabbi, the grand rabbi of Curious Joel, I'm passing by Curious Joel in a minute now, would be surprised to see that that this court finds him to be the chief rabbi of America all of a sudden, and and that the Satmar Hasidic community is the official religion of the United States, which of course that was never his intention. That goes against everything that the Satmar ideology and theology stands for. But on a local level, there's federalism, separation of powers, and freedom. In the end, of course, the courts found against Kiryas Joel, and that's why the school district had to be reformatted to be purely secular, as it is. There's not even any mezuzahs on the door, which is a big reason why a lot of the people oppose that. A lot of the people in Kiryas Joel oppose the school district and don't take money from the school district. I mean, I personally send my children to schools that do. My oldest daughter, is in a yeshiva that takes money from the school district, and she doesn't have busing, but because we don't live anywhere nearby, but there's secular books and so forth, as it is in all school districts in New York State, that parochial schools, private schools get busing that's more than 1 mile and less than 50 miles, and get secular school books and certain other amenities from the state or from the local school district, and that's just how New York State law operates, and it makes sense, So anyway, with that being said, Chuck Schumer right now is fighting against Neil Gorsuch, who is a man in the mold of Justice Scalia. And so by fighting against Neil Gorsuch, he's basically saying that he's really not a shomer. He's not a guardian. He's not a protector of the Satmar community, because he's fighting against the basic freedom of religion that we need to exist, which is a basic American ideal. Because by fighting against a man like Neil Gorsuch, he's really fighting against us. So by saying that, and really the fact is, the people in Kiryas Joel have a lot more in common with Protestant Christians or with religious Catholics like Justice Scalia was than with secular Jews like Ruth Bader Ginsburg. We certainly have much more in common with them. So it's certainly by fighting against Neil Gorsuch, Schumer is demonstrating that he's not in the pocket of Kiryas Joel, because he's working directly against the interests of Kiryas Joel. So then the question begs, why do these types of communities still vote for Cuomo, who also did something that is totally against our values when he redefined marriage? So why do these communities still vote for these people? Now, if you look at a community like Bloomingburg, which is much smaller, they voted against Cuomo. The Satmar community in Bloomingburg voted against Cuomo when he ran for re-election. Also because Cuomo was fighting actively against the Bloomingburg community. So what is the meaning of this? Why do these votes to these communities tend to go overwhelmingly to one particular candidate? The answer is, it's just like the question, why did Donald Trump, for all the years, if he was an independent or a Republican, often give donations to Democrats? Donald Trump in many ways is very similar, as like a one-man Hasidic community in certain ways. But the point of what I'm saying is, these people are going to win with or without Kiryas Joel. Even the high amount of Jews, Orthodox Jews, let's not just say Jews in general, Orthodox Jews in New York State. If New York State has one of the largest communities of Orthodox Jews in the world, probably the largest, I think, maybe second to what's in the Holy Land. Now, that being said, if not one, now many Orthodox Jews vote Republican. But some of these communities, for various reasons, feel compelled to vote Democrat. And what's the reason? And I'm going to explain it right now, very simply. Even if not one Orthodox Jew voted for Cuomo, he would still win. Even if not one Orthodox Jew voted for Schumer, he would still win. And that's one of the unfortunate dilemmas of having these large and very visible communities like Williamsburg, Borough Park, Kiryas Joel. I mean, look at how all of those communities Donald Trump won, maybe not by the margins that you see in local or state races, where usually, quite often, the Democrats win, or really whoever the winner is wins. And even though a lot of people in those communities, a lot of community activists were supportive of Hillary for various reasons, some noble and some not so noble, and yet the general public was not swayed. It also shows that they think for themselves. They don't just blindly vote for whoever the Rebbe tells them to vote. First of all, the Rebbe doesn't tell anybody who to vote for at all. It's generally there are community activists who are secular activists. I mean, religious people, pious, religious Hasidic Jews, but they're not rabbis. They're businessmen. They're people with political connections who will give advice as to who is worthwhile to vote for. And in general, they have one of two reasons to vote for someone. Like, for example, recently in Monroe, the main faction of the Hasidim of Aaron lost a local election, and they knew they were going to lose because they knew that the dissident groups, the B'nai Yol groups and others, the Neturei Karta groups, were going to side, just like the Neturei Karta side with anti-Semites in general. They sided with United Monroe. Now, what they should really know, though, is that United Monroe is really run by Zionists, by Israelis. That's who's really funding all of these groups, the Mossad and so forth. The same thing as in Bloomingburg. It's more obvious because the faces of these groups are all admit to be Jewish. I wouldn't be surprised if Emily Conver was really secretly Jewish. Someone should look into that. But the point is, I mean, she claims she isn't, but I have a hard time believing that she isn't Jewish. That being said, that's what we really need to let these Neturei Karta groups know, is that really what they're doing is more, they're not siding with Arafat, they're siding with Netanyahu. They're not siding with with Ahmadinejad. They're siding with Netanyahu, really, when they're voting for United Monroe. They think that they're, they see United Monroe like Neturei Karta see Ahmadinejad, which is stupid in itself, but that's a different story. And maybe if that message was gotten out, they would think twice. In any event, the point is, so in that case, so why did they bet on the loser? Because they need to show gratitude. That's part of the reason why, for example, New Square gave their votes to Hillary Clinton, to show gratitude. Even though they don't have any respect for her, it was a matter of gratitude because of a favor that she had done many years earlier. So, that being said, we see the same thing. That's one reason why they would vote. And the other reason is just simply they have to vote for the winners, because when you have such a visible community, they're opening, there's a fear factor in it, that there's fear that if they vote for someone who they might have more in common with as far as values voting, which would be usually a Republican, that they would be persecuted by the government. And so therefore that's why they pick their battles very well, and that's why, for example, they didn't make an issue, which I think was a mistake, because really they should learn that one thing leads to another. I mean, right now, for example, they're worried about the education systems being attacked. And that's an issue that they're fighting for, because there are a lot of rebels in the community who are not happy that they themselves have the freedom to send their kids to whatever schools they want to, but they want to rob individuals the rights of their religious freedom to choose what their children learn in school. They're not truant, they're not taking their kids out of school, they're keeping them in school, but learning different things, and learning probably much more than is being taught in the average public school, with much longer hours, but something different, and it's a different culture, and they have different goals and different approaches to life. And the Supreme Court already founded on this as far as the Amish, that they're in their right to do this. And so the New York laws that are on the books, first of all, they're meeting the legal requirements, because when you study the Talmud, you're studying history and science and literature and mathematics. All of those things are in the Talmud, and they're in the Bible. So the studies and in Jewish law and so forth. So the studies that the yeshivas are doing really are on like a college level when compared to what are in, I mean, they're really on graduate school level, really, when you compare them to what goes on in public school. I mean, I went to public school years ago and it was a lot better. Now it's in the toilets, and it's so ridiculous. And quite often the best schools, especially the girls' schools, quite often the Haredi girls' schools, whether Hasidish or Litvish, do way better on all the standardized tests than any public schools or most private schools for that matter, because they focus more on that, because there's less focus on religious study in the girls' schools. And then they're trying to stop the girls from going to college. I mean, the boys, they don't even have the Havamina to go to college, But and the thing is they wouldn't be saying it if it wasn't happening, and it is happening, and what they should really do is offer kosher colleges. But that's their own business. But my point is that this idea of the Bloc vote having so much power is really a myth, because but the thing is, we see, since they didn't fight about the redefinition of marriage, now they're going to face troubles because of the schools. Because what are they worried about, the schools? It's not such a big deal if they have to learn a little bit of American history, kosher, clean literature. That's not what they're worried about. They're worried about what the real goal of these progressives is to really fundamentally change these communities. And, we see it happens in Europe, in England, and Canada to a certain extent, that the schools are being forced to learn things which are against the values, things relate to sex education and talking about these very issues. And really, by virtue of the fact that these communities there were a few brave individuals that stood up when these things happened. I mean, I remember going with Rabbi Levin to Washington, D.C. To protest. And a lot of people, he's this and that, they call him all kinds of names. But the thing is that he's standing up for the Torah. I mean, there is such a thing as, basic, the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach. I mean, there are basic morality laws that we expect the whole world to follow. That is a Jewish ideal. That's what Maimonides clearly says. We don't expect everyone to keep Shabbos and kosher if they don't want to. I do believe people should be more welcome to convert to Judaism if they're interested and they're sincere about it. But as far as, these basic, laws, and a lot of people just ignored it and said, that's not our fight to fight. And the thing is really, they weren't Royas and Noilad. They didn't see what the future would bring, is that it leads one thing to another to the point where now we're worried about the schools being attacked, and what kind of things are they going to teach in the schools now that these type of things, we didn't fight against them and make our voices heard. even if it wasn't going to have any effect. So it was a mistake, not to, it was really a mistake supporting Democrats in these things. But the thing was it was a fear factor that the Democrats are going to win without even one Orthodox Jewish vote. It's even possible that if you look at the sheer numbers by which Schumer won, New York City really just destroys all the rest of the state, as happens in a lot of these state matches, is that the urban areas just really destroy the rest of the state as far as the elections go. It would almost make sense to divide up, take everything from, including Westchester and South, and have it make its own state, and have upstate New York be its own state, and we don't have to deal with this kind of nonsense anymore, because we're not really being represented the way we should be, because the upstate is mostly rural, mostly Republican, and it's a shame. Although the thing is, the New York-style Republicans are a lot of, Rhino Republicans, a lot of, Rockefeller Republicans. They're not the type of Republicans that we really need. People like, who are really originalists, people like, Ted Cruz. You get more people like Donald Trump, who's not so bad. He's definitely better than someone like Hillary Clinton, but he still has a lot of liberal, progressive, leftist views. You see now, his whole health care bill was ridiculous. It was, repeal and replace, but don't replace it with something that's just the same but worse, He just made Obamacare on steroids. I don't know what he was thinking, except for the fact that he was a Democrat for a long time, and he really still is. He was friends with Hillary Clinton. The Clintons and the Trumps went to each other's weddings. They were good friends. So the whole thing is kind of, upsetting. But the thing is that, but this with Chuck Schumer, I think really demonstrates that when it comes to really important issues, that the Satmar community, all of these communities have zero power. And the reason why they maintain these block votes is a moral issue of gratitude and a fear issue of preventing being persecuted if they vote the wrong way. Because really, when you have a big community like that tends to vote monolithically, if you don't vote, or if you vote the wrong way, quote unquote, it's very visible, and you really don't have a secret ballot in a sense, because they know who voted. And all right, so if you have 5% who are voting in the other way, you're not going to really know who those 5% are. But if you have 95% voting a certain way, pretty much who those 95% are, and we have records of who actually voted. So that's part of the reason, and that's part of the sad state of something that had to be given up because of this the expansion of these communities. It's really much nicer to have the smaller satellite communities, so we maintain a bit more freedom. But on the other hand, a lot of people they want to live with these amenities, and also out of respect for the neighbors, don't want to encroach on other communities, which is really why places like Curious Joel are expanding within their own borders. People talk about, Curious Joel's making a land grab. They're not making a land grab. This is all land that's owned by majority Hasidic community, and they want to have the ability to build more on the property that they own. Why? They don't gain anything from that. They would gain a lot more. Their lifestyle and everything would be much better if it was more suburban or semi-rural. So why do they build so much? Well, because the people outside don't want them to move there. They don't want to see their communities changed, particularly when it comes to things like the school district. I mean, that's a very major thing. I mean, you see the difference between like East Ramapo and Curious Joel. All the problems that you have in East Ramapo, which are not really problems, they're more like optical illusions of problems, because really East Ramapo School District is doing a lot better than a lot of the other school districts in the general area, particularly with similar demographics. It's really one of the better school districts with those type of demographics, because they have a lot of money, because most of the people who live in that community don't send their kids to that school. So there's really a surplus of money in those communities, and they're way, way overtaxed. So that's why they want to say no taxation without representation. And if, we need this more, if the district needs more money, really, most places with similar demographics get money from Albany, which really East Ramapo deserves just as much as, let's say, I don't know, some of these other communities, I don't know, Yonkers or something like that. So that's, but in essence, that's not a problem in Curious Joel, because they have their own school district, and, nobody from the Curious Joel school district can vote in Monroe Woodbury School District. So really, it's in the best interest of the people outside of Monroe for Curious Joel to stay within their own borders, to expand within their own borders, by rezoning, redistricting within really their own borders, and not invading other communities. So really, it's the annexation, and really ultimately the secession from the town of Monroe are really the most moral and ethical things that are really positive. And the fact that United Monroe was fighting against the secession shows that they're really just, rabble-rousers. They're not really leaders in the community. They're just rabble-rousers who, Emily Convera would be out of a job in her rabble-rousing job that she raises money for. She sells hot dogs for $20 or whatever to raise money for her, for her organization. How much is that? It's probably going right into her pocket, because she knows if there was this secession, she'd be out of a job, because she would have everything she wants. It's like in the Weird Al song about Yoda. Yoda tells Luke Skywalker, "Don't kill Darth Vader, or you'll be out of a job." It's like, sometimes you have to create an enemy when you don't have an enemy, because, it's, some people, I mean, that's not, I'm not saying that Curious Joel is Darth Vader. What I'm saying is, like, United Monroe wouldn't have any reason to exist, without this. Just like, the Zionists have no reason to exist without the anti-Semitism they make up. People like, I'm not going to name names, but certain people in certain communities that are well known, they tend to be like, they play up racism and all this, and make accusations of racism when it really isn't any, because they're quote-unquote community organizers. They'd be out of a job if there was no, if it wasn't there, if there was no racism. So they make it up sometimes. So the same thing, they made this like paper tiger of Curious Joel, when really Curious Joel is the best. United Monroe made Curious Joel into an enemy, when really Curious Joel is the best thing for the people of Monroe outside of Curious Joel. If anything, the Curious Joel has what to lose by having a village, by having Curious Joel. All of these things are not in the benefit of the Curious Joel community. They're the benefit to the outside community far outweighs whatever benefits are to those inside the community. Except, to a certain extent, a lot of these groups are interested in assimilating the Hasidic community and eliminating the unique qualities that the Hasidic community has that's different from other communities, and that's really what it's all about. All right, well, thank you for watching. But again, this is basically the point. What I'm saying is there really is no power to these black votes in certainly not in the state, and certainly not on the federal level. I mean, they don't even try to do anything on the federal level. I mean, you see how bifurcated the presidential election was in Curious Joel, because again, well, a lot of people knew that Trump was probably going to lose New York. So that's how it is. Well, thank you for watching. Please subscribe, and God bless.